So bonjour, Ani, and bonjour, greetings, everyone. I want to say miigwech. Thank you all for joining us today for another session of the UBC Dean's Community Engagement Series. And this is a series that I'm going to say I've really appreciated over my last 2.5 years as the Dean Pro Tem. It's been a way to engage with the field on topics that are significant to education today, especially as it considers scholarly research that is linked with practitioners and experts, leaders and educators in various fields and from schools and communities. And so I just want to welcome those who have been here regularly and those who are joining us for the very first time. So my name is Jan Hare, and I'm just pleased to serve as the Dean Pro Tem of the UBC Faculty of Education. And I'm also a proud UBC alum, having graduated from the Department of Educational Studies. I am a guest on these lands, being an Anishinaabe from the Chiging First Nation. And I would like to acknowledge that UBC Vancouver is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people, and that UBC Okanagan is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan Nation. And so these lands have always been a place of learning for Indigenous people who, for millennia, have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on these lands. And so I would like to recognize that you are joining us from many places, both near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. And to learn more about the land on which you reside, I recommend visiting the website, native-land.ca, and I believe it's in the website. And it's a really helpful website in which to begin to understand Indigenous lands, your Indigenous presence on those lands, and I just encourage others to turn to that. So I have indicated a little bit earlier about this, but this is really a series that is designed to showcase research and practice and to engage discussion around important questions and significant priorities impacting educators today. And as I was saying, these sessions allow us to explore how we as a community can support and empower young people to face the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of them. And I'm going to say it was just a beautiful start with the music and visual montage by Kanan. So our conversation this evening considers how school systems respond to the migration of immigrant and refugee students and the impact of school experiences on their social, academic, and cultural well-being. As we see the increase of newcomer and refugee families to Canada, our schools have a responsibility, I believe, to build culturally responsive bridges to students and their families and communities with the goals of strengthening resiliency and address the many challenges that immigrant and refugee students face. And yet, student success varies widely based on school practices and policies. Existing research highlights the gaps and issues in facilitating the integration of students, including language, social challenges, socioeconomic concerns, social emotional health, motivation and engagement with school, racial discrimination, and the changing constellation of factors impacting their families' levels of stability. So while not all newcomers to Canada face the cumulative effects of trauma or interrupted learning, new language acquisitions, educators do need to develop their understandings of how these experiences and conditions of schooling affect the development and learning of young people. So tonight's focus on creating learning environments with supportive curricula and culturally responsive pedagogy led by teachers and school leadership is important, as it offers ways to counter school-related acculturation narratives that form these young people's experiences with schooling. Equally significant for us as educators is to contemplate, what enables immigrant and refugee students to thrive, giving us opportunity to pause and rethink our pedagogical approaches and teaching styles to address the growing diversity of needs resulting from this international migration. We want for immigrant and refugee students, in fact, for all students to feel a sense of belonging while taking pride in their identities and experience success and satisfaction with school and with life. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation ahead of us. And so I will now invite my colleague, Dr. Tomlinson, to open up and begin this session for us. So miigwech, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Hare, and welcome to all our guests today. My name's Lynn Tomlinson, and I'm Assistant Dean of Professional Development and Community Engagement in the Faculty of Education here at UBC, and I'm also a proud UBC alum from many, many years ago, won't tell you how many. I'm honored to be with you all today and extend a warm welcome. We have a big group, which is really exciting. A reminder that this session is being recorded. Please see the notes in the chat for any instructions on turning off your camera or changing your display if you want to change your name, however that would suit you. We will also share some additional resources in the chat to help ensure that this session is warm and welcoming for all in attendance, including the UBC Respectful Environment Statement and resources pertaining to UBC equity and inclusion. I know Sarah's posting those for you. After our three speakers have presented today, there will be a question and answer. You will have received an email with the option to submit your questions for the presenters. Thank you to the many of you who did send us along some just wonderful questions that we'll delve into today. And we'll also post a link in the chat with a form where you can submit questions should you so wish. And then lastly, before we get started, we found that it's always really helpful for our speakers to have an idea about our audience. So we'll use the poll function in Zoom to ask just one simple question, identifying the current context from which you are joining us. And these responses are captured anonymously. So please just have a look at the poll. That's great. Thank you. It's really helpful for us to know where everyone's from. And we're now ready to get started. So it's my honor to present our speakers this evening, and we'll let you know about them now. So our first speaker is Dr. Sofia Noori. Dr. Noori is an assistant professor with UBC's Faculty of Education in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy. Her research focuses on how refugee youth navigate schooling systems in the aftermath of living in civil unrest or war, migration, transitory states, or refugee camps and resettlement. Her work is informed by post-colonial theory and developmental psychology. She's working with educators from across the country to help develop resources, materials, and strategies to help meet the academic and psychosocial needs of newcomer students from war zones. Following Dr. Noori, we will hear from Asma Howba. Asma is originally from Syria, Aleppo. She came to Canada in 2016 after living in Lebanon for some time. She graduated from Asuri High School in 2023 and currently has a part-time job and is saving money for her post-secondary education fees. And we are so pleased that she aspires to be a UBC student soon. So that's just wonderful. After Asma, we'll hear from Karbir Qurban. Kabir. Kabir is a secondary school teacher, an acclaimed human rights advocate, and a nonprofit executive. He currently serves as a program coordinator at Muslim Food Bank and Community Services, the executive director with Free Uyghur Now, and a lead member at Afghan Diaspora Vancouver. In addition, Karbir is an award-winning film producer and authors his own blog, sharing reflections about his work and life. Thank you so much to our three speakers for joining us today. We will now turn things over to Dr. Noori.
Thank you so much. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري وأقتدر لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Thank you, Dr. Jan Hare, for extending this invitation and asking me to speak to this wonderful community. I'd also like to thank Dr. Lynn Tomlinson for her wonderful introduction and for her support Special thanks goes to Sarah Lockman for organizing today's event. And I truly appreciate everyone who's here in the audience, near and far. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So as I begin, it's important for viewers today, especially those in the audience, to consider their mental well-being as they listen and watch our presentation. We will be discussing difficult situations and circumstances related to war, persecution, and resettlement. This might make some people feel uncomfortable, so please do your due diligence to safeguard your emotional state as we begin. Today, I am in Toronto, also known as Toronto. It has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. The treaty holders are the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. And it is very important for us to understand that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. It's an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. And these treaties are very important, particularly for newcomers to know and to understand and to be aware of as we try and to find and locate ourselves in terms of how we situate ourselves in relation to Indigenous people. In fact, most people who flee war and who are coming to Canada due to military occupations of their land are so preoccupied with survival that it sometimes takes decades for them to learn that they are also part of this settler colonial system. Through immigration policies and mass influx of settlers from all over the world, the original inhabitants of these spaces continue to struggle for their rights to the land, to the waters, to the resources, and everything within. They are not consulted when it comes to welcoming newcomers or who ought to be coming in. As such, these land acknowledgements must provoke more than just speech, but move to action when we think about solidarity, especially as we think about who we are as guests and what it means to be good guests, primarily because most of us are unwelcome guests. And to know that the hosts of these lands continue to be so kind and generous to us, in spite of the centuries of white settler colonialism and the vestiges of reserve systems, residential schools, the 60s scoop, and so many other forms of forceful displacement that they have faced. It is imperative that we learn how to have good relations with Indigenous people. When we think about refugees, it's really important to think about the international community and international bodies that actually define who refugees are. When it comes to refugees, the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, determines who is a refugee, an asylum seeker, someone who's internally displaced, and so on and so forth. As you can see from the chart, there's 110 million people who are forcefully displaced in the world. This is the most since World War II, since there have been data on this. Of that, 62.5 million are internally displaced. That means that these people have not left their home countries, and only 36.4 million are identified as refugees. This does not include those people who have left due to climate change and other issues that are related, not directly, but maybe indirectly to war. There's an entire different wing of the UN that's specifically for the Palestinian refugees, and that's called UNRWA. So from time to time, you might hear that organization's name. So it's important to consider that there's a different link there altogether. When it comes to refugees in particular, it is important to remember that these definitions were created by European imperial powers, especially at the end of wars. And it wasn't really until 1967 that the protocol and the convention extended to people outside of Europe. And so there are three main criteria to be identified as a refugee. Number one is based on their identity of difference, that something led to their persecution. So whether that's their race, religion, nationality, membership to a particular social group or political opinion. then it's a forceful removal from their home country. This basically means that those boundaries and borders that were, again, created by those imperial powers come into effect, and these people are forced to move out of these spaces. And then the third thing is that they cannot return to that home country or to that nation state. If they do, there's a well-founded fear of persecution and usually death. So the UN determines who a refugee is if people meet these three criteria. They also have three ways of solving the issue of refugees. The main one is repatriation, voluntary repatriation. This means that the person goes back to their home country. Second is local integration to the first country that they have moved to. And third is resettlement in a third country, which is where Canada comes into the story. When we think about refugees and we think about nation states, when people leave these countries and cross these borders, what happens is they actually give up their civil and political rights, that they are no longer protected by those governments. So essentially what this means is that they don't have a body, a governing body to protect them and to fend for them when they are dealing with issues related to their human rights. So this whole process oftentimes starts of dehumanization essentially starts way before they even leave because they are made to feel other in their own states. Then they do leave and then they're continue to feel like less than human because they really are relying on the humanitarian aid or support of neighboring countries. And this process is not just political, but also people are losing their families, their homes, their sometimes if they remain out of their state for a long period of time, their languages, their culture, their friends, and this process of loss can have really detrimental effects as people continue to live in a state of refuge. As we know, Canada prides itself and is known for being a place of asylum. And this myth has been here since, the Underground Railroad stories that Canada was the final terminus for Black slaves trying to flee the United States. Oftentimes, we don't even talk about Canada's own history of slavery or how that legacy plays on when it comes to our refugee and our immigration policies. As you can see from this slide, 75,000 Syrian refugees have come to Canada since 2015. 47,000 refugees have come from Afghanistan to Canada, and there's actually an unlimited number of refugees who can come from Ukraine to Canada through the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel Program, and already 175,000 Ukrainians have arrived. These numbers might seem very large, but the truth is it's actually less than 1% of the world's asylum seekers and refugees. And oftentimes when we think about that, and we think about Canada opening up its borders, the truth is there are people who are not given access in the same way as those people named were. So when we think about the number of people who have been displaced in the war in Sudan, which is actually more than the number of people who have been displaced due to the Ukrainian conflict, there is no pathway to come to Canada in the way that it has been made for these other people. Since 2015, stats show that refugees or people who are seeking asylum from war zones are coming to Vancouver, Abbotsford, Kamloops, and Victoria. Majority of the people who are coming to BC are originally from Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, and Eritrea, which is a country in the Horn of Africa. So when you have people coming from different parts of the world with, histories of persecution and war, it is very hard to determine exactly how to help them, especially as teachers, as we try to figure out how we can best support them. So oftentimes a multitude of different strategies need to be taken into account because they are coming from so many different contexts and so many different life stories, which means that they have different experiences with education. When it comes to students in particular, you might have students who have witnessed war, and you might have students who actually have not witnessed war. And some of them may have fled due to personal reasons. There might be prolonged time of refuge. In fact, right now, the average time of staying in a place of refuge, basically without resettlement in the host country, in like a third country like Canada or in their original country is actually 20 years. This means that most people are growing up as refugees or as asylum seekers, and sometimes that means that they don't have access to education. In fact, 94% of children all over the world have access to elementary education, but only 50% of refugee students finish elementary school. Over 70% have access and complete high school around the world, but only 23% of refugees are able to complete high school. And finally, about 34% of youth around the world go to university, but only 1% of refugees have access to university. So in order to learn more about the student experience, we have Asma, and Asma will be talking about her experience as someone who has come to Canada through many different stops along the way, originally from Syria.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. And I'd like to thank the Dean community for letting me share a bit of my story as a Syrian refugee. Next, please. So I would like to start with my name. My name is Asma Howba, and I'm from Syria. I grew up in a religious family, and my family was a big family. I grew up with my uncles, cousins, etc. My childhood was a mix of happy and horrible memories. But I remember before being a refugee, I'd be very happy playing with my cousins, going to school, elementary, loving the life that I lived. Yes, next, please. I'm from Syria, Aleppo, and Aleppo is such a beautiful city. Also, it's one of the oldest city in the world. And the University of Aleppo is such a big university. We teach medicine, history, and a lot of other stuff. And mostly people all around the world would go to Aleppo University to study. Our country is a history. Also, Aleppo was the capital of Amarite dynasty of Ahmad. Sorry. So it was such a big city and it was important in history. Aleppo remained traditional for Arab poetry and music, cuisines, and handicraft. So yeah. Okay. The war has changed everything. People dying and some in need of help. People got scary sick and they have saw I was traumatized of what I saw, and because 12 people of my relatives, I saw them dead, and 2 of my uncles. One was 9 years old and the other one was 13. I was shocked and depressed. I got into a depression. But alhamdulillah, I got out of it and I went through it. So yeah. Next. During the war, I still remember how the war actually made me feel and the depression that I went through. I studied kindergarten and grade 1. Also, at the beginning of grade 2, I stopped going to school. I loved learning and school, but it was really hard for me to continue during the war. After months, Lebanon. I moved to Lebanon in 2013 after my uncles had passed away. We had to leave the country. It was horrible. Where I moved to seek a safe place and refuge. Lebanon welcomed the Syrian people at the beginning, but many were racist and they would always tell us to go back to our country and we're not welcomed in this country. For example, school. For Syrian refugees, school was not allowed and we're not allowed to study with the Lebanese kids. We also had a program after school, which is from 3 to 8, and we had to go alone, walking, and it was very dangerous. Also, every time my dad would pick us up and walking back home, many of the Lebanese guys would stop him and threaten him if he don't give money or a cell phone or anything they could actually use. They would kill him or throw him back to the country. Education in Lebanon was okay, but as a Syrian refugee, we were not allowed to take language classes such as English and French because we were not smart enough. That's what they would always tell us. The teacher didn't pay much attention of what we're going through, and they would always tell us that we're not good enough, and some of the kids and some of my friends were actually traumatized of what happened, but teachers didn't pay much attention and they would always go on their phone. So basically the education was not very good. And also I had to wait 2 years to enter my enter school. Please. Canada, February 2nd, 2016. This is the day I arrived to Canada and I was very happy to start my journey in this country and to establish a life. Next, please. Arrived to Canada, February 3rd, 2016. I arrived with my family. Education was my goal. I was very happy that I could finally get a good education and finish high school, which was a dream to me. I was very excited and I wanted to learn a lot. And also I had a dream to become a doctor and help all the refugees kids, such as Syrian kids, Palestinian, and other many that actually in need of help. Winnipeg. It wasn't easy for me, but I tried the best that I could help my parents with translating. I lived in Winnipeg for 6 years, and I started going to school. Helping my parents was a bit hard because I was learning, and at the same time I was translating and explaining to them. I started wearing the hijab since grade 6, and many of the students and the kids in my school would always tell me, why do I have this fabric on my head? And most of them got scared of me, telling me that I should take it off. Also, teachers mostly paid attention since I started wearing the hijab. They would always tell me that we could help you if you like to take it off. You're not forced to be hijab and you're not forced to wear this fabric on top of your head. They mostly cared about if my parents were convincing me or not. But I always looked up to my mother and I loved being a Muslim girl. And one of my classmates in middle school at River Heights, called River High School, where I went through a lot for 2 years. I got into a very bad depression because students in my school wouldn't like to talk to me or treat me different or not sit beside me. And one of my classmates called me a terrorist, and the teacher actually heard him, but nothing happened. Also, at that time, my English wasn't very good, and I didn't know the meaning of this word. So I went to the office and I told them of what actually happened. But they told me to go to class, and at that time, nothing happened. I told my parents, and they talked to the school, but they just said, we're sorry for what happened, and didn't actually talk to the kid that told me that. So, next, please. We had to move to Vancouver, BC, and to start a new life because of what happened. And yeah, next, please. August 1st, 2021. This is the day where we arrived to British Columbia, and we had to move because my grandparents actually came from Lebanon. So, yeah. I wanted to help my family, so I started to look for a part-time job after school, but it wasn't easy. I had to focus on school, helping my family with translating doctor appointments, and looking for a part-time job. And alhamdulillah, thank God that I made it and I graduated from high school. And now I'm currently working. And inshallah, I will get into university and finish my education. And I would like to give an advice that I could give as a refugee, that we could keep hope in our heart. No matter what we're going through, we have to always try, and there would always be a better way. And because of the things he knows that we could actually handle, and for our iman to be more, and it will be stronger. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asma, so much for telling us your story, a little bit about your story, so candidly and openly. I know that must have been very difficult for you. And it might have even been difficult for many of us to hear that you've had to face so many sad circumstances and situations at such a young age. So thank you for sharing. When we talk about education for refugees, a lot of what Asma says is true for many refugee students. While refugees oftentimes are thought to live in refugee camps, they also actually live, a lot more of them live in cities in the countries that they reside in. And oftentimes, depending on the laws of the country in which they live, they may or may not be able to go to school, or they may not be able to go to public school. The parents may not be able to afford private school. And so this becomes another barrier to their education. And so many teachers now are dealing with students who have large learning gaps. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there might be parents who take their children to, many different countries, and they do have an opportunity to learn in different countries. But this means now that they have 3, 4, maybe even 5 different curriculums that they've gone through. They're now learning their 4th or 5th language. But all of this to say that we do need to have a strength-based approach when it comes to teaching and mindset when it comes to these students, because they do come with skills and abilities, and it is up to us as teachers to find what those are and to really empower students so that they can thrive in terms of their education. The research that I'm doing right now, this is a QR code for those of you who are teachers in the audience, and from BC in particular. You can go to this website or use the QR code to participate in this research. Based on current research already, we know that educators make the biggest impact on students' well-being, as well as their sense of belonging and integration into not only Canadian schools, but also society. Oftentimes teachers know this, but it's always a good reminder that being effective and helping means that we do have to be very empathic. But at the same time, teachers are also very much limited in terms of time and resources to learn as much as they need to and to get the help that they need in order to support their refugee students. So to talk about the teacher experience, I'm going to call on Karbir Qurban to not only just tell us about him as a teacher in Surrey, but also his experiences being forcefully displaced as well. Karbir.
Hello, hello. I hope everyone hears me. Yeah, I want you to look at all those different photos. That's what a refugee looks like. Just regular dude, nothing special. You know, it's just, but there is something deep down, a lot of questions, just like the one that you see there. Where are you from? That's that top one right above it that says traveler, it says musafir. A lot of us identify with this word because we are not quite in our destination. We're always on the move trying to go somewhere. And with that being said, I do want to quickly say that I am indigenous, just not to this land, a land that I was forcefully displaced from. And I am very, very thankful to the original stewards that have welcomed me to this place, that have taken care of the land now that I call home, where I work on, where I reside. Currently, I'm tuning into you from the Semiamu, Katsia, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kait, Sawasan area, Surrey, as you may know it. But as a person who has been forcefully displaced, who has his people, I am Uyghur by ethnicity, who is currently having his own family members, you know, forcefully disappearing, getting sent to residential schools. I am eternally thankful for the original stewards of this land, for the work that they did. When I get to enjoy the Pacific Northwest, I see this. And we have to take that into account when we talk about refugee education, because the folks here, or the original stewards, never had that chance to leave somewhere, and it's still theirs. So we have to have this conversation. And what I wanted to say next is that, yes, I have a lived experience. I came here in 2003 from Kazakhstan, a country which I am not from, but legally that's what it says on my passport. I went to a Russian school, and this is already my third language. So when I came to Canada with the English alphabet in my mind, and they ask me to do a spelling test, and they say the word neighbor, here I go, Neybor, and then they miscorrect me. They're like, oh no, it's actually Neigahabor. That's where I was a bit confused, where I didn't quite see myself as a refugee. I just saw myself as an individual who didn't speak English. But that's not how people perceived me. That's not how the educators perceived me. And this became more evident after I graduated high school, when I looked back at my high school experience. When I run for the student body president and I win the election, but I don't get the position because there's a person applying to University of Pennsylvania and it would help his application. When I see individuals all that grew up with me, spent these multiple years of my high school experience, and I wanted to show a sense of gratitude to my principal, I put flowers in my cap and gown. In the wizard sleeve of my gown, I put a set of flowers. And as I walked across the stage and I pulled it out smilingly to hand it to the principal, the administrators all ducked. Now, who is it that we're kidding? What is it that is going on here? When it is my sister who is currently, and I'm proud to say this, she came to Canada when she was in grade 10, not speaking the language. When she asked what courses should I take, they would tell her, oh, you should probably take apprenticeship in workplace math. You don't really have the capacity. Who are you to do this? You should go to Douglas College and take your time with everything. Have you thought about maybe not even going to school, seeing if you could just work as an assistant? My sister persevered. She had to retake the math classes that she was advised to take by the counselors in post-secondary, had to pay out of her own pocket, working overtime in a Dairy Queen salary, getting minimum wage. And we're not talking about $17.50 that they're trying to push it to. We're talking back 2006 minimum wage numbers, 2007 minimum wage numbers, excuse me. And now she's an engineer. And I'm proud of that when I say that. And even when I look at myself, my lived experience, I am so privileged to be here. So privileged and happy and thankful to be here, to benefit from the opportunities that is the global West. When I tell people that I am Uyghur, I may be from Uyghurstan, and they look wondering at me, what Yogurstan do you belong to, dude? When I tell them that I'm half and half, they think that I'm some sort of like ethnic concoction. And this is when I took this step and I said, I needed to be the person that I needed when I was growing up. And I really appreciate Dr. Noori when she spoke about what it really means to be a refugee. Now, there's a definition and you heard it, but being a refugee is a very subjective conversation. For me, what I see the word refugee, and Dr. Noori touched upon this, it is the difference between a refugee and an immigrant, well, do you visit home in the summers? Do you get an opportunity to go back home? Do you get an opportunity to call back home? This is actually a privilege that I don't even have with over 30 family members missing in China. Now, I am your colleague. I am a substitute teacher in Surrey, and I carry this with me. Now, what does it mean to me? It means that there is so many youth within these institutions that I have to reach and I have to talk to, because unfortunately, I speak to students in an ELL class, and I can clearly tell that they should have a designation. But our systems are slow to catch on to these because of language barriers and certain time that they must go through for them to actually receive these benefits of basis programs and getting access to the LST room. And then I also see individuals who care, genuinely care. Because when I was in high school, I had to make friends with the janitor to find a space to pray. So now when we see, if you are in Surrey, the rise of MSAs in some of the schools and how Muslims are trying to step up and have a prayer space, I try to be there as a mediator between the admin and the students. My job as a TOC, I get stretched into being a chaplain at times, trying to really get these cultural nuances across. And when we see individuals that really do care, like whether they be the administrators, other teachers, this is a funny story when a Somalian kid who had come to Canada, fresh, maybe like 3 weeks in, comes to the school and they're like, hey, Karbir, you're Muslim, right? Can you help me translate here? And I'm here looking at this African child, Somali child, a language that me and him both don't speak. They thought that he spoke Arabic and they assumed that I did too. I'm not Arab. I do not speak Arabic. Yes, I could say salam, but that's like, dude, anybody knows that. So I smile at him. I say salam. He looks at me, smiles back, says wa alaikum salam, and we know exactly what happened. He was not an idiot. And I told him that, okay, just through hand language, anybody could have done that I'm around for you, dude. And that's what we need to do. We need to be around first and foremost, dude. Inclusivity, or we should not exclude through the umbrella of inclusivity. And this is a problem that I see. Where is this really going? How are we truly dealing with this? And I want to say a huge thank you to the UBC department for having individuals like Dr. Noori discussing, researching these very, very nuanced questions. When we look at projections by 2050, and these are scary numbers, 1 in 8 individuals will be displaced around the world. I really want you to internalize that number. 2020 came like this, 2050 will come just as fast. And us as educators, as administrators, we mustn't shy away from these topics. We should only step into them. With the month of Ramadan coming in less than 2 weeks, how many of us know about the needs of our students? How many of us know that their schools don't even serve halal food? Half of half of the school doesn't even know what halal is. And I was lucky enough, I learned Russian in Kazakhstan, and I was placed in a very weird place because I speak Farsi, Dari, and I get a chance to speak to the Afghan youth. I speak a little bit of Arabic where I actually picked it up at work. I speak a little bit of Russian, so I had an opportunity to ground myself and sit down with some of the Ukrainian folk and have these conversations. And believe it or not, the first thing we discuss is not whether or not we're refugees and what our experience is. It is very human conversations, dude. How can I help you in this specific math class? What's going on? What are you dealing with as a teenager? These youth, the ones that we like to call refugees, they do not see themselves as that, especially at that young age. We know that our brains are not fully developed, and for us to romanticize and understand these complex terms as asylum seekers, refugees, that takes time. And the trauma that we witness and receive, we only can unpack as adults. Where I sat down and I wondered, why was it that everybody ducked? Why is it that the counselor came up to me giggling and say, hey, you had us worried for a second? without them even questioning themselves once or twice? Why was it that I didn't get that position as student body leader when I clearly won by a landslide? Sure, one of the kids wanted to apply to University of Pennsylvania, but who am I? Am I not capable? Was I not ready? Sure, language is hard. We heard, but what are these kids doing after school? Or they're going to work. They're coming back home, filling out their papers, their parents' document. Oh, you're worried that they don't know a little bit of English? They are more qualified than majority of the people. They're filling out government paperwork. They're filling out their parents' documents for their doctor. They're trying to translate these medical terms from the physician to their parents, all while simultaneously trying to figure out the Pythagorean theorem. I get it. We cannot have patience for everyone, and we need to teach a class of 30. It makes sense. But we should not shy away from the question. I'm not saying that I have a solution. I'm only an individual who just sees problems and tries to address it. As the fire is there, I try to put it out. And I expect my colleagues to do the same. But the reason I really was interested in this conversation was because there are teacher educators here, because there are curriculum developers here. And I am an Uyghur advocate, a substitute teacher. I'd like to teach physics, bio, and chem. That's my thing. And I'm just here to relay the message of what I've been witnessing in these schools. And lastly, I do want to say a huge thank you to UBC for actually taking this initiative, because I graduated from SFU PDP program. And if anybody else graduated from there, I want to let you know that after my year, they stopped the reflections. It was a headache. It was so many reflections upon reflections. But with that being said, thank you for actually, giving me an opportunity to just offload a little bit of this, to share some of this. Advocacy is like this big weight that anybody could put their hand on and make it lighter for the individuals carrying it. You could take your hand off and not care. But I want you to remember that if you're taking a break, because sometimes you need to, come back, put that hand on. Let's share this weight together. It's not mine, but I'm here. And I'd like to have you alongside with me. So thank you very much. And I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, Karbir, for your experiences, for telling us about what you've seen in the schools, and also your part in this as an advocate. And also, I hope that we can all share in this responsibility. Thank you. So a lot of what Karbir mentioned has been found in the preliminary findings of my research. Teachers don't feel well prepared or prepared enough to teach refugee students or students who have backgrounds of war and refugee camps or living through displacement. They mostly identified language barriers as the most pressing issue. The focus groups actually showed us how some of these teachers are responding to this challenge. In the GTA, the Greater Toronto area, teachers are using translation apps, and in the Metro Vancouver area, they are making use of translators. They also want to see more information about students' cultural practices. So for those of you who are participants of that research, thank you. And for those who want to be participants, follow the link in the chat and participate as teachers. Now, having said this, and going through some of the experiences and research that's available, we are in a very special place in the faculty of education at UBC. We are trying to develop a refugee education program. We already have pre-service students taking refugee education as an elective, particularly for those who are in the secondary teacher candidates. This class is available for both Bachelor of Ed students and the Master students or certification students. The course is very practical and classroom-based. The course code is provided there for those of you who are interested in taking the course. We also have a graduate course that is more focused on research and methods of doing work with refugees, and particularly in the scope of education. It's taking more critical approach and a decolonizing of academic research related to refugees. So the course code for that is provided as well for those of you who are interested. Now, for those people who are in-service teachers, so not people who wanting to go into grad school maybe just right away, or for people who are in the pre-service cohort, I have with the help of the LDDI team and the faculty, created a teacher's manual. This is the QR code, and Sarah will provide the link in the chat as well that you can go into. For those of you who have access to UBC's CWL, this will be a very easy process for you. For those of you who don't, it's still an easy process. You just have to go through a registration process to make use of this resource. This resource is a manual that is very Canada specific in context. The first chapter opens up to issues around war and what students are dealing with in terms of escaping war, the psychosocial needs that they might have. And then the third chapter is related more to resettlement. And in each one of these chapters, there is material specifically for teachers to make use of, not just in terms of awareness, but actual practical things that they can do in their class when these things come up for their students. Chapter 4 really talks about what Karbir mentioned earlier, which is teaching refugee students, teaching students who come from war zones or whose families come from war zones is not just the teacher's task, but we do have to acknowledge that they are on the front lines and that they are dealing with these newcomers and they are really struggling. So there is a community of educators, whether that's Swiss workers, other settlement workers, community members, particularly in the BC context, those are provided in that chapter, in addition to what administrators and counselors can do as well in order to help these students and the teachers. Chapter 5 is specific for teachers. There are resources here, including novels, books, puzzles, not puzzles, sorry. There are puzzles in each chapter that will actually help you understand the content of the work, but games that are available to help teachers to make use of those resources and use them in their classrooms as they see fit. Now, we've heard a lot from, or not a lot, but just a little bit from Asma, who talked about her experience as someone who escaped war and refugee camps. We also heard from Karbir as someone who has, moved past that time in his life and has become a teacher and now helping students. And I actually have a really hard time with telling my story and talking about my past and my family's past. But recently I heard and read a poem by Professor Rafat Al-Arir, and it kind of gave me a little bit of courage to do that today. So as someone who survived war as an infant and someone who had the refugee experience as a child and then resettled into Toronto and has lived here for the majority of my life, the title of his poem is If I Must Die. If I must die, you must live. If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail, so that a child in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, that you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. This poem really resonated with me because I see myself as a byproduct of that love and of that hope that Professor Al-Arir wishes for his children and the children of Gaza and my parents wished for me. The greatest victims of war are children, whether they witness war firsthand, which is awful, or whether they don't remember, or they didn't witness it directly, or people like me who had parents who fled the war and continue to live with the consequences of war. For me, I live with phantoms of loved ones who were kidnapped and never seen again, most likely murdered by a Soviet-backed military. I live with memories of places that were described to me, houses, gardens, valleys, mountains. I also have family members who survived, but now have prosthetic limbs, who don't have parts of their face, who still have shrapnel in their bodies. I live with the ghosts of my parents, of who they were before the war, and the reality of their twisted psyche that we call trauma. But those tales often are related to times long ago, more than 30 years ago. But for them, it's not. For them and for many survivors of war and those who have been forcefully displaced, seeing images coming out of Gaza is extremely triggering, because their bodies and their emotions keep track and respond, even if they don't with their voices. When I hear the BC's Minister of Higher Education describe Gaza's land, it actually takes me back to a grade 10 history class, to a class where I had a teacher who I really respected and looked up to, who almost verbatim said the exact same things about the land of my ancestors. I'm not going to repeat those words, you can look it up. I am amazed by the bravery of people like Asma, young people who are able to openly and candidly share their experiences. It gives me hope that maybe I can one day too. But what I have done, or at least I've tried to do, is live by the words of Professor Alarir, because I've tried to live responsibly, because I know so many people did not survive. And so many who did survive weren't given the opportunities that I was given. And so I trudge forward in the hopes of creating a more positive future for our students and our children through my work and through my research. Professor Alarir was killed with many members of his family on December 7th, 2023. And for educators and for those of you who are in the audience, I ask you to think of these questions as I leave you for this part of the presentation. How will this knowledge change your pedagogy? What will you do with these stories? And how will you show love and hope? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Noori and Asma and Karbir. Everyone, I think it would be good if we took a 1 minute, just a time to just stop and just put your cameras off and just think for just a minute, and then I'll come back and we'll begin the questions. I think there's a lot to really digest, and the power of your stories need to have a little bit of time of reflection. So just a minute, if you turn your camera off, and just have a think. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I just want to draw your attention to the Faculty of Education's professional development opportunities. There will be future offerings on this topic. And I also want to draw your attention again to Dr. Noori's teacher manual that she shared. It's an absolutely wonderful resource for teachers. So those of you who are in the K-12 system, I encourage you to have a look. We will share more resources in the chat, but we have a lot of work to do. And in the Faculty of Education, we are aware that we need to draw upon the wisdom and the stories of people like Karbir and Sofia and Asma to make sure that we get it right. And we're just beginning. So thank you so much. We'll move into the discussion. We have a few set questions, and then we also have the questions that you've sent along via email. So thank you so much again to those of you who did. We'll start, Dr. Noori, with a question for you, if you're ready. To sum up some of what you've noted in your presentation, can you please reiterate for us, in your opinion, how can teacher education programs better support educators in having the awareness and strategies to build welcoming environments for refugee students and youth?
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomason, for that question. So there were a few things that I mentioned in the presentation itself. Having empathy is really important, showing care towards these students, but also really trying to understand where the students are and where you can meet them and how you can fill those educational gaps if they have them is really important. That might be difficult. Another thing that I would say is teachers, so for the faculties of education, I think what's really amazing is the work that we are doing at UBC, specifically having courses around um, these issues that refugees are dealing with and facing. Um, and there are centers across Canada where they look at refugee issues, but oftentimes it is from the perspective of law or legal issues, or from this perspective of public health and public health issues, or maybe even psychology, which all are really, really important and relevant. But to really push forward and to see education as a place of healing and as a place where teachers can get engaged in a way that can help their students, but through the university, and providing that training would be really key and important to do that for our future educators, especially as we see so many people coming in from war-torn countries, and having those lived experiences does require a certain level of sensitivity and understanding. So the faculties of education, I know that, for example, York University had the BEAR project, and also here, at UBC, we also had, this wonderful project with the Dadaab refugee camp, and providing teacher training for, um, you know, people in the camp so that they have the skill set and knowledge set, so that those numbers that we see where only 50% of refugee students have education, or just for elementary school, and only 24% have refugees have education for secondary school, providing that kind of resource and support for teachers that are on the ground in those areas is really amazing. And I know that we had that project at UBC, and York University had that amazing project as well. But those projects, unfortunately, because of the mass amount of funding that's required, makes it really difficult to maintain and have that longevity. Although what was really great about both these projects is that they had local universities also participate, so that they could continue some of the work that was started by UBC and by York University. But what I really appreciate about UBC is actually being on the cutting edge of education in terms of providing this kind of support to future teachers, even if it is just as an elective course for secondary students, and providing some sort of support for soon elementary school teacher candidates. And then obviously having space and opportunities to do research, to actually find out what are the needs, what are the learning gaps. This is something that we have to do across the country, because different places have different resources. Some have a real lack of resources, some have actually very little, if any. Even the ministries don't provide any resources for their teachers, and yet we expect them to do amazing work, but we also need to provide them that support, and the universities can really do that, especially through the teacher education programs.
Thank you. Again, a lot of work to do. We have to get those people to fund things. You're right. Karbir, working in schools, and I'm just so pleased that you are working in classrooms with students. What are your top strategies and tips for building strong relationships with the refugee students and families that you're working with?
That's a very good question. Step one is don't assume, right? Like, throw assumptions aside. Like, even my students that come to me, hey, Mr. Qurban, your beard is getting very long. Are you like, are you on like, are you like more religious lately? I'm like, no, dude, it's just a playoff beard. Like, it's not always super deep. They don't always want to be therapized. They don't always need advice. Yeah, we can give them advice, but just level with us. It's the same approach. Like I said earlier, the first thing we need to see them as is students. What is the first approach to any student? We have to level with them. All right, what is the story? Dude, you look a little bit tired. Is it because you're a refugee, or because you just didn't get sleep last night? Right? Are you struggling with your grades because you're just not maybe eating breakfasts? right? It doesn't always weigh on our mind. A lot of times we actually suppress that part of our identity. We let that like be unknowns to even ourselves. And so we wouldn't tell you these problems because we don't know that they're there. We've never, like, when I say we, like I used to be a refugee, like, we're not seeing therapists. We're not seeing counselors. The stuff costs money. We're not seeing these individuals. So we don't ourselves don't know what the issue is. So step one, we are all individuals. You know, yeah, there's hooligans. Yes, there's gems. Yes, there's all of this, just like in any sense. Like, so really, you know, taking a knee beside someone and saying like, hey, what's up? Oh, wait, you don't understand what I'm saying? Okay, let's see. Okay, how can I break this down for you? Oh, you misunderstood it? Okay, let me say it differently rather than just giving up on the topic. So having that extra bit of patience, I'd say, would be the only difference. Other than that, it's the same approach. I don't think a kid wants to be told that, hey, man, I'm going to give you extra time because you're a refugee. As a matter of fact, like, you know, stay away from me.
Right. Thank you.
And just to add to that, just from my own research and work that I've done, there are assumptions that are made oftentimes of students who have particular backgrounds, refugee or not, that they are now experts of that background. And so as educators, I think it's really important that when you want to discuss particular issues, sometimes especially difficult issues around war, genocide, and all these sort of things, not to put students on the spot or assume that they would know. Because like I mentioned earlier, some students don't actually have that experience themselves. Maybe their parents went through it, but they haven't. And sometimes parents actually protect their children by not talking about it and being very future oriented. And so for that reason, they may have no clue about what you're talking about when even you're giving history lessons. So that's also just something to add on to something that Karbir mentioned. And then in terms of community, Karbir, how would you see that connection with community in terms of helping educators?
I'm sorry, I really, like, the second part of the question, I guess, it flew right over me. But
It's more building relationships, Karbir.
yeah, it's a very tough one because they're built, like, right now we're building a lot of communities in like the North Surrey area. There's a lot of MSAs, Muslim Student Associations, that are up and coming. If there is 10 Muslims coming together and praying, and there's no one advising them of starting a club, there's a problem. And that's just a small number, right? If you have all of these kids that they're somehow gathering and they're already praying together, and we're never telling them that, hey, you should join as a club. Hey, by the way, you should fill out a form so your parents are aware that you're stepping out of class to go and pray. Really allowing them to lead their own conversations. And us, of course, we have to be there. We have to step in and somehow intervene some of the toxicity that exists within youth. Right? That's our job. We can step in. We can use the SSLs that are available. We could use the the counselors, having like a more in-depth approach. But community, it starts within the school. They have their own communities outside of the school. They'll connect to the mosques. They'll connect to their local churches. They'll connect to their lack of better words, to their outside of school community. But within the school, allowing them to really know the different mechanisms that are available there within the school to advocate for themselves. Maybe in foods class, asking for halal alternatives, right? If they're making pasta with chicken, maybe giving them that option. Right? Believe me, if somebody came up to me in high school and said, oh yeah, by the way, I took the extra step to make sure that you get halal options, I would have been so excited. That would wow, you a person who doesn't eat halal meat are telling me that you're going to do this for me. Thank you. I will remember you. And still to this day, doesn't matter if it's my colleagues or just anyone who goes out of their way to accommodate for me. I will reciprocate. I will appreciate.
Thank you. Asma, we have a question for you. Just, you've just graduated, just finished last year. And so from your perspective, if you were asked to give advice to new educators, we have all these teacher candidates that we're working with, and we have teachers who are in the classroom for many years who would also appreciate your advice. What advice would you give to them in terms of supporting refugee and immigrant students?
For that, okay. Well, an advice I could give that letting the student refugee choose of what they like, as like such as language classes, and also for example, like a higher grade of math or science, not just like regular class, for them to graduate and get out of school. It's just like having more patience and explaining, even though it's hard for them to understand and the language is kind of hard, but like trying to explain, and also for the student to have patience and try to learn more. And yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, I have a question from the emails that were sent in, and anybody can respond. So this is just an open question. What kind of supports would a high school student have in schools in BC and Canada, and which have been most helpful from your point of view, from any one of you? So we know that, that we're trying to get some supports into schools. Which ones do you think have been successful?
I'm just going to jump in. A good friend of mine, the cultural liaison, right? Overworked woman. She's doing amazing work. So having cultural liaisons to come after school and just like really break down certain things. A quick funny story. I've worked at the Muslim Food Bank, and one of the things that we were advised is, can we let people know to stop bribing the police? So these quick like cultural nuances that is so like humorous at times. We just need somebody to address the issue. So having more of a presence, because an entire district to have like 2 cultural liaisons, when you look at a population like Surrey, dozens of schools and secondary and elementary, it is something that is very needed, and it's there. It's just we said, like with any of the stuff that we're dealing with, a bit more would be helpful.
Right. Any other responses? Yeah, Sophia.
I was gonna say, in terms of the research that I've done and speaking to teachers both in Ontario and in BC, BC is actually a little bit more ahead in the sense that the schools here, or in BC, I'm in Toronto, actually have Swiss workers who kind of prepare the students and the parents for school, and also prepare the teachers for the incoming students. Not that it's always exactly or enough. Teachers are still saying that they need more support. But that fact that they have that in a lot of the Ontario schools, actually, I haven't heard of any that have that kind of structure in place. They do have like welcome centers, but again, that's for the students to go to themselves. They're not referred to. Also, not all of them go to those places. And many times the main scenario for teachers in Ontario is that a new student comes, they're just taken straight to the classroom after registration. The teacher doesn't know anything about the student doesn't know anything about the teacher, and they just walk into class. The teacher just finds out their name at best and sits in a class of 25 to 30 students, and then somehow the teacher has to find time and a way to get to know the student and help them integrate into the classroom. And it's irrespective of the whether they have immigrant backgrounds. But the fact that BC has Swiss workers it's really great, and because part of that is federally funded, it'd be really great to see that across the board, especially now that we have new immigrants or newcomers from refugee backgrounds going to the Yukon territories, Maritimes, and the ministries from what I see, have very little, if anything.
Thank you. Another question focuses on the strength-based lens, strength-based, sorry folks, strength-based lens of students. And I'd like you to just talk a little bit about how you think that people in the K-12 and post-secondary systems might best support and bring out the strengths of our newcomers to Canada, and what are some ways that we can make sure that we avoid that deficit lens for students? What would you recommend?
So there's a couple of things that come to mind immediately. One is increasing access and opportunity. When we talk to when we're thinking about K-12 and families are newcomers, particularly if they have refugee backgrounds, oftentimes people don't actually know that they have to pay back the flight tickets that brought them to Canada. And, they have stipends if they are government sponsored refugees. So that amount of money has to be stretched. And then, when students, need laptops and they need, devices, or they need the internet, and the cost of internet can be very high. These things can become very difficult for their success in terms of their education. And oftentimes we don't think about that when we think about access to education from the K-12 kind of lens. So there are these structural problems that come out when we want our students to succeed, and we're seeing so much of our education system depend on digital technology. In terms of the post-secondary, again, access, there are people who want to go to college, want to go to university, but just the application process seems to be quite horrendous in BC in particular, that, there's a lot involved, and that can kind of deter some students from seeking higher education. And then also just understanding the circumstances of some of these newcomers. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, over 110 million people are considered, seeking asylum. Only 34 million are considered refugees. The other 60 plus million are, internally displaced. Or what happens is when these people actually come out and come to Canada, they still have responsibilities to their families and to the people who they know that they have left behind. And so they're carrying this kind of double task of trying to be successful here, but also trying to make sure that people in wherever they left them are also taken care of, whether that's financially or otherwise. And so understanding these circumstances and these issues is a key part in increasing access to higher education, but also kind of looking at those structural barriers and trying to find ways either to reduce them or maybe even remove them, so that it does become easier for newcomers from war zones to be able to actually access higher levels of education. That actually thinking beyond just language, because I think language everyone talks about and understands, that language is an issue. And one other thing that the research also showed is assessment, which is something that I hadn't really thought about until I did the research. The forms of assessment that we have for students to be changed, to be diversified, so that they can be successful in their assessments in order to move forward in their education.
Well, I'm very proud to just touch on that, Dr. Noori, and let you know that we're offering a new non-credit assessment program that touches in on assessment strategies from around the world, led by Dr. Brooke Moore. So look for that for next year, those of you who are working with students from all corners of the world, because we're really excited. It'll be based on research and practice, and it'll give you throughout the year some great tools and resources to support students.
Can I just add on that?
Yeah, sure.
Really quick. One thing that practically what I've seen is we have to acknowledge their resilience, as they've gone through a lot, but we don't need to rely on it, right? They have gone through a lot. They're resilient. They're strong. And we could remember these moments, and like sometimes, honestly, kids, they just need to be reminded, like, dude, you got it. Like, you can do this. And we need to also assess their priorities. Why is it that the kid is skipping your CLE class? well, oh, he doesn't care because he's literally going to work. The career class he's skipping because he's going to his career. He's trying to help his family, right? Really trying to assess their priorities. What is it that there are a lot of refugees, they age faster. I've seen 14-year-old kids come to the food bank and grab 100 pounds worth of groceries for their family at 7 a.m. in the morning and just like, thank you, bye, have a good day. Whereas another 14-year-old kid, I need to remind him that not to get lost in the hallways when you go to the washroom. Right? So really acknowledging their resilience, but not relying on it, and assessing their priorities. Right? Not every kid needs to go to post-secondary, right? And the ones that do should be encouraged as much as they can. Right? Thank you.
Thank you, Karbir. I'd like to just turn it over now to Dr. Hare, Dean Hare, to just wrap up today's session. And I'd like to thank you from my heart for your sharing of your stories today. We have a lot of work to do, but you've given us a great place to start. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, well, miigwech, what an important conversation unfolding this evening. And as Dean, I'm going to say I'm really proud of the work of scholars and educators in our faculty who are contributing to teaching and scholarship in this area of refugee immigrant education. And I heard other speakers talk about that this evening, and they're looking at this from multiple perspectives and lines of inquiry. Along with Dr. Noori's leadership, tonight I see Dr. Nashan, Dr. Norton, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Early, as well as Dr. Duff, who have joined us this evening. So miigwech, Dr. Noori, you really set for us, I think, an important context, starting with the international communities, defining refugees, and those who experience geopolitical conflict, as well as, leaving really unbearable environmental conditions, and then how these definitions then impact on their experience of migration. And we see this, I heard this in the stories of Asma and Amir this evening. And I think that historical and contemporary context that you set regarding immigration policies in Canada is just so critical, as you say, to disrupting that myth of Canada as this, welcoming nation. And yet Canada's immigration policies are, I'm going to say still based on this colonial notion, right? That immigration is necessary, right, to building this country. But I'm so struck by the personal narratives of Asma and I'm going to say, and the educator viewpoints, such as those of Karbir, who reinforce for us that education systems, schools, teachers, and leaders play a significant role in helping immigrant and refugee students to integrate into their communities, overcome adversity, and really build their academic and social emotional well-being. So miigwech, Asma, which is thank you, Asma, for your experiences of navigating the uncertainty in your journey. And it's a demo, and for sharing that, it's a demonstration of just incredible strength, supporting your family, as you talked about, adapting to school, and constantly really challenging cultural assumptions and norms, as well as racist stereotypes. And I really take inspiration from your comment about we always need to try. And so thank you for that. Karbir, you said you are a regular dude. You said, I'm a regular dude. Well, but dude, you are also unique. So your advocacy, your passion, and the agency of yourself and students, and how this all becomes part of your educational practice is really, I'm going to say, is an example for all of us to follow. And just how you share taking that time to learn and listen about student backgrounds and needs, and assisting students and families, and creating opportunities to build students' self-esteem and take pride in their cultures and languages. So all students in public K-12 students have educational, civil, and privacy rights, regardless of their immigration status. And I think we need, as educators, to understand those rights. But more importantly, what I heard is about we need to take a strengths-based approach to teaching and learning. And so I encourage all of you this evening to draw strength from Dr. Noori's own story shared this evening, as well as take up Dr. Noori's charge, like, how will you show love? And thank you. Thank you for that. And again, like Dr. Tomlinson, please look to her resource shared this evening. And then I just want to leave us with the words of Karbir. Let's share this weight together. And we all have a responsibility. So miigwech, everybody, for joining us this evening and for this really important conversation.